What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So I actually did end up seeing the recent dev diary and the next step video for test drive, and well, I did actually want to talk about some of this and go over my honest thoughts on some of the things that were talked about. And I have to admit, some of the video was a bit confusing to me, but the first thing I do want to talk about though is going to be the emphasis on the optimization part of it, because I was listening to this and I was a tad confused on it. I mean, they were basically saying that the initial first patch is mainly going to focus on consoles and all platforms, but then it's going to say something about the emphasis on the PC and like better, experience for that soon. And the second patch will end up coming a little later for the PS5 part of it, and this was a tad confusing to me. Okay, the reason I'm a bit confused on this is we all do know most of the players in Test Drive are probably going to be on console, am I right? I mean, looking at most games nowadays, I would say a majority of their said player bases are on consoles. So I would probably say you might want to get the patches out for the 100,000 or so apparent players on the consoles instead of the 3 to 5,000 players on the PC getting their performance better. Have to admit, guys, on the PS5, the game really isn't going to be all that great performance-wise. I mean, we can all agree on that. The frame dropping when you're going fast, the entire thing can, like, freeze up and stutter and stuff like that. Like, that probably needs to be addressed, which I do understand in the thing they were talking about that they are aware of the performance issues. But the only thing I was thinking about with this, though, is we all do know they said this is going to be addressed in a later patch, right? I mean, that probably is going to mean right off the bat that it is most likely going to be at least another month away or so. I would be incredibly shocked if we actually got a patch in a couple of weeks for the PS5. Let's be honest, that's probably not going to happen. They were also talking about these server issues, saying, there is going to be an issue in the initial launch, and a lot of players weren't able to play the game, but also a lot of players were able to play the game, which was kind of scratching my head right now, was a little bit weird because a lot of people had issues and still are having issues, which I would say, again, the first patch is hopefully going to fix that. But then again, most of the players who couldn't play are probably not going to come back to the game, unfortunately, which I can't blame them. I mean, you had a 7-day early access, people actually want to play it a bit, and they spent $90 on the game and they can't even play. I look, man, I can't even get mad at that. I mean, that makes complete sense. I pretty much understand. I had issues the first day. People are having issues a weekend and stuff like that. So, it does make sense. They were also then talking about like the server side of it in the aspect of they were actually overwhelmed by the success of it because they were always going to be prepared for a lot of players that actually wanted to play or they were anticipating it. But then again, they also did not realize of the amount of issues that a lot of players could actually have on the game when they were trying to log into it and stuff, which I would probably say many of us were mentioning something about this. I actually had a video about the server thing way around the beta, guys. Back then, I was talking about this a bit going, I'm a bit worried about the servers, man. They are going to have a lot of issues. This is my biggest concern. The other part of that I was talking a bit was also on the aspect of, well, we are going to have a closed beta, which is probably not the best decision. They were talking about wanting to detect more issues with more players on it. That probably would have actually detected a ton of server issues if you had an open beta with it on the consoles. I do think that probably would have had a lot of issues come out and they would go, oh man, okay, we have a lot of things here. The initial launch day is going to be a nightmare because my goodness, we had what, like 100,000 players try to get into the beta because it was free, but instead we're actually going to have 100,000 players get into the game when it did end up coming out, and we weren't completely prepared for the issues that would actually end up bringing to the server structure. But they probably could have had some of that solved doing an actual free open beta to everybody. Then they probably would have been a tad more prepared. At least I think that probably makes sense. I would say most people are going to agree on that one. And I was thinking about this, man. Like, we all do know the servers were a nightmare on day one and kind of still are in some ways. I still get disconnected here and there, which again, I do know the actual update, hopefully coming next week, is going to fix that. But when you're doing a 30-minute race and you get disconnected on 29 minutes like players have been, that is probably not going to be a fun experience, I would guess. The next thing I did want to talk about is going to be the offline and solo features they were talking about. They were obviously mentioning that at the end of the game's life, they were going to implement or think about doing something like an offline mode, similar to what the Crew 2 and Motorfest will be getting at the end of their life cycle, so that would probably make sense. They were then starting to talk about the actual solo player aspects of it, onto where we did see in the beta before that, yeah, they were going to introduce something to where I'm sure everybody does remember back in the day of having to wait 40 seconds, I think it was, or 30 seconds to get into that said event, and now it's going to be around 10 seconds, which they did implement, but you can still have people join you if you want to play solo. It's not going to be a complete solo experience. And on top of that, if you actually want to do legitimately PvP or something, it is probably not going to be a very good design in my opinion. I mean, I can deep dive into that if you guys would like, but I'm sure everybody is going to agree. The easiest way to actually have matchmaking in that way is to, well, probably make it separated. That way, if you want to play multiplayer, you play it. If you want to play single player, you play single player. Kind of like what, From Software does with Elden Ring and stuff. I think that would probably be the better way to do it like that. They were also talking about this game being focused on a more of a racing experience, which was a bit confusing to me because in the actual blog post, they were saying it's not a racing game, it's a driving game. And now they're talking about everything being like an MMO style, which I get. I mean, we want everybody to race together. You want to interact with players, see their cars, race them, actually play with people and meet people. Like, I get that. That does make sense. But the thing is, though, a lot of people are going to be frustrated in the racing part of it, and also having like the MMO experience to players. A lot of them probably want to play solo. Funny thing is, when I was playing Need for Speed Heat, being able to jump into it solo is going to be such a dope experience. The game loads quicker. You don't actually have to worry about people, like nothing's going to happen in that said region with you or anything like that. You can play by yourself if you want, but if you want to go into multiplayer, at least the actual design is there, so you can go join your friends, do races and stuff like that. Pretty sure that's probably a good design decision to do it that way instead of having everything kind of botched into one, because then the servers get messed up. A lot of players are like, bro, I just want to do this race, but the servers are messing up because everything is connected. Now, the other thing I did quickly want to discuss here is going to be the small snippet they actually had on the crossplay part of it. Not going to lie, guys, this part is probably not going to make players very happy when I was listening to it. They were basically saying technically it's not going to be a very difficult thing to have all the data displayed on different platforms like, console and PC. And then on top of that, they were also mentioning that actually mixing consoles and PC together is actually fairly easy, but there is going to be a challenge that is going to be certain restraints, which I'm guessing is going to be like the cheater part of it on PC or something compared to console. That's my guess. I mean, that would probably make the most sense with it. Here's the thing though, if that's actually going to be a huge concern in the races, at least make the actual free driving crossplay, man. Like, that way players can play together, they can actually enjoy the game together and drive around on the map, and experience stuff, actually cruise around. I think that would be pretty dope. We all do know something like Motorfest only has crossplay on like the actual PvP game mode, which I would actually say makes sense in an aspect of being able to find lobbies easier, which is something I thought about with Test Drive. Like, the way they did it on that game does make a lot of sense. That way you can actually find players. It's not going to be locked to a certain thing. If you actually want to do a PvP game mode, it's always going to find a ton of players on basically every platform and pretty much everywhere. That does actually make a lot of sense. We also saw something like that on Need for Speed Unbound. So, like, if you actually do want to have a main rank game mode, something like that would make sense. I would also love if they can actually add crossplay into the regular map on there as well, but hopefully Motorfest will actually have a free roam crossplay design to it. Really hoping for that in the future. On top of that, I think Test Drive also kind of needs something like that, but then again, it seems like they're more focusing on something about the servers and not eventually adding something like the crossplay, at least right now in the near future. They were also talking about this in a way of the cross-region thing similar to the crossplay. This is basically going to be the entire region lock. They were talking about like Americans playing with like European players. And the thing about like the entire servers like glitching out or having issues, which I could understand like probably a ping standpoint on that. But here's the thing. We also do see that in Need for Speed Unbound. We saw that in Need for Speed Heat, which came out, what, 5 years ago? We also saw that in Battlefield. We saw that in Call of Duty, and they seem to be just fine. I do understand to a certain extent a lot of that can be like servers, backing, resourceful stuff like that. I get it. But I also would have to say, though, if players do want to actually play with their friend in somewhere like Europe, they are obviously not going to be able to. And I do have to give credit where it is due, though, with Motorfest, because yes, the entire PvP is going to be crossplay. Normally when I am playing that, and yes, there is going to be PC, Xbox players in there, About 99% of the time, man, I admit the servers were pretty dang solid on PvP. Like, yeah, you might see some players probably like going back and forth, but it wasn't crazy. It wasn't constant. I would also say the same thing about Need for Speed Unbound, even though we are going to have the issue of the entire crossplay of PC players cheating and stuff, which I did actually encounter in Need for Speed. Is it happening in Motorfest? I would say that could also be a possibility. Now, the next part I did want to talk about is going to be the snippet they had on the AI's part of it. This is something I really have to discuss, guys, and I would also recommend grabbing some ranch because some of that was definitely some word salad, I do admit, because they were basically bouncing back and forth on the fact that, yeah, the AI are overpowered. They're supposed to level up with you and be challenging the entire time, which I get, but here's the thing. If the leveling of the races go down, let's say to 750 and my car is 749, and the car behind me is going to be some random car, not the 812 or something in the supercar category. It's some random car that's 80 levels behind me, but somehow they are accelerating faster than my car can even accelerate. Does that actually make sense, bruh? Like, does that actually make sense? I don't think it does. And if you were trying to look at that in the aspect of, yeah, they're driving like an overpowered car, I get it, because the 812 in some events was insane. You're probably going to see the buggy being insanely quick and you can't beat it. Yeah, there is going to be some really fast AI in certain places, but the thing is, they can be fast in basically any vehicle they are in, which they were talking about in the video. I noticed that, like, sometimes you see an AI driving a Mustang, they were really quick. Other times they were driving an Alpine, they were going to be way too fast around corners. And I would say that's probably going to be an issue because players are like, bro, I'm driving this quote unquote meta car in this category, but I'm getting beat by a Mustang in corners. How does that make any sense? Now, they have also mentioned, though, that yes, the AI are going to be rebalanced with like the aggressiveness, and they're also going to be adjusted, which I'm guessing is in the upcoming update, most likely coming next week, which is going to be great. They were also discussing how the Bugatti can actually take turns at basically Mach 7, which is kind of hilarious because I was noticing that going against it. And I would say in some ways that's going to be highly unrealistic, but they also wanted to have the AI being difficult. And in some ways, I would actually say it's going to be a bit insane at the same time of them being difficult. And I do think seeing a Bugatti take a turn at speeds my car can probably not do is kind of weird. The next thing I did want to discuss a bit though is going to be the meta part of the video. So they were saying on an MMO standpoint that yeah, you're probably going to have like overpowered vehicles. Some cars are going to be better than others. We all do know that's probably going to be pretty obvious in some of the categories. I mean, looking at Daily Driver, the Audi TTRS, looking at Cross Country, the Buggy, looking at Supercar, probably I would say something like the Ferrari or even the Lambos. And it was also discussing on the meta thing on how it is going to change over time, and you're probably going to see different vehicles like basically pop up, and they are going to be really good, then other cars might not be good. They were also talking about something like the Audi TT, for example, changing categories, which is really weird how that would actually work. If I do see an Audi in the supercar category, that would be something. I could also see certain cars being nerfed and stuff like that in the future as they were discussing. But again, guys, I would say the entire meta thing is going to be part of basically every single racing game, which I did actually end up making a video discussing this entire topic, which is most likely going to drop next week. On top of that, they did actually talk about the all-wheel drive on how they might end up nerfing it, because we can clearly see that the all-wheel drive cars are better than the actual rear-wheel drive ones, but a lot of the other content creators and people have discussed other ways to do it. Maybe they can actually make it so you can't really race rear-wheel drive with all-wheel drive. I don't know, man. Actually buff the rear-wheel drive cars' traction just a bit in the rain. Also maybe get rid of the damp roads and stuff would be kind of dope. And then maybe give the rear-wheel drive cars actual like rain tires so they can compete. Because I do know for a fact a lot of rear-wheel drive cars in real life do not have issues in damp roads like they do in this game. That is obviously going to be a fact. And the thing is, though, they were talking about separating the rear-wheel drive compared to the all-wheel drive cars in some of the events, which I think that could actually work and probably make it a bit more interesting. And in that aspect, it would probably help the AI just slightly with them being absolutely insane. The other part they did talk about in this, though, is going to be the compensation. Now, they didn't really say what the Go players are going to get, but they did end up discussing something along the lines of not getting like a million solar coins or like a cosmetic item. So it really does make me wonder, like, what are they actually going to give the gold players? Because if you're not giving them a million solar coins, what are you going to do? Give them like a free supercar? That's more than 1 million solar coins. What are they going to do? Give me like a free car that's like 500k or something? I'm really wondering what they're actually going to do for the compensation. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. What do you guys actually think they are going to do for it? Now, overall, though, watching this video, like, yeah, there's going to be some good points and stuff in that, but I also have to admit, guys, I really do think this big patch coming next week really, in some ways, is probably going to be a make or break type of thing for Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. Like, I have to admit it. That patch is going to have to be absolutely insane, fixing a lot of the issues players are having. And on top of that, though, the other side of that can be a bit concerning with any patch coming out on a game nowadays is, are we going to have more issues after the update does come out that, like, yeah, we're going to fix a few, but here's a few more problems on top of it? That would be insanely unfortunate. The one thing I do have to mention about the entire server issue side of it was also a bit odd to me. I have to be honest on that. Like, yeah, there is going to be players that could actually play the game and they might have enjoyed it, but there's also going to be a huge majority of people that couldn't play the game that didn't enjoy it. That's probably why the entire review on this game is not all that great. But I also believe, though, getting this game to a full positive review is also going to be a challenge in itself. The other thing I did actually want to talk about here quick is going to be, again, the server side of it. How they were saying the players that got into the game when everyone else was having issues, they were enjoying it and it was going to be a TDU experience. To be honest, man, that was incredibly confusing. Like, yeah, players got into the game and they enjoyed it, but what about the tens of thousands of players that couldn't play the game and actually enjoy it because of these server issues? And I do feel like players that got in probably had a great time playing it, but I also feel for the people who wanted to play the game but actually couldn't. Do let me know what you guys think about the entire launch dev diary video in the comments below. What are some of your key takeaways? What are some things you like? What are some things you don't like? And I think we can all agree that entire launch dev diary video is most likely going to spark a ton of conversations, some of which are probably going to be good, and of course, a lot of which I think are not going to be all that great.